We are about to begin the absolute positioning tutorial. If you intend to follow along, make sure you have the files downloaded and also put your windows in order for how you like them arranged on your screen. I've just got three. I've got the index file in Chrome as well as the element inspector open over here. And then I also have my editor with the CSS file ready to go so that I can save my changes. If you are following along and you need to also have the video up, you may have to get a little creative for how you want your windows arranged. If you have multiple desktops, I would recommend using them. Go ahead and pause now if you need some time to get ready. I'm going to dive right into code coming up next. Okay, so first let's take a look at this code. We have the element inspector open here, and we can see what kinds of structure are available here. This page has a header and 3 sections. We're going to do some different positioning with the elements in these 3 sections. The first section has these shape divs, and they are just based on some CSS and some content. So we will be working on those. They are inside section with ID S1 and an H2 here as well. We're just going to move these shapes around a little bit. So they all have class equals shape. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new selector here in the section 1 styles of my CSS. I'm going to say .shape, and in there, position absolute. This sets us up to specify exactly where we want these elements positioned. I'm just going to save that and refresh to show what happens here. These elements are now all taken out of the normal flow and stacked. There's no space left where they were. So the section has collapsed to the only content that is not absolutely positioned, that H2, that section 1. Now we need to actually move around these elements. Let's start with shape 1. I'm just going to specify the top and left coordinates at 0. Shape 1 is now way up in the top corner of the entire page. This is because of context. Absolute positioning looks into the parent elements and says which is the closest one that is positioned, and then that becomes the new 0, 0. If we want all of our elements in section 1 to stay within the context of section 1, that means these sections are going to have positioning. Here in the CSS we have a section tag selector. I'm going to position them relative. Relative just means that I want it to behave like normal flow, but be positioned. Now the sections are my context. The 0, 0 position is now the top left corner of the section instead of the entire document. That's because I positioned the section. It is now the parent of these shapes, the closest parent of these shapes that is positioned. That is context. Let's do shape 2. Let's put that somewhere more interesting. Let's put that at top 30 and left 100. So shape 2 was this exclamation point with the rounded top corners. 30 pixels from the top of the section, 100 pixels from the left. I'm going to inspect again. And to fine-tune my positioning, I'm going to come into the inspector and actually edit the CSS here before I go save it in my file again. This is a nice way to fine-tune exactly where you want your elements to be. I'm using the arrow key on my keyboard, the up arrow key, to increase this value until it's exactly where I want it to be. I think somewhere around 160, maybe 162. Let's go with that. That looks like okay. Now I know exactly where I wanted it to go. I can save it in my file and refresh. That's shape 2. So far we've done top and left coordinates. There are also right and bottom coordinates. Let's say we want to mix and match with top and right on this shape number 3. So we'll start with the top. Let's go with 10 pixels this time, just a little bit. And you know what? We'll just go with the right at 10 pixels as well. It'll be real obvious what we're doing. So I saved that. Now my shape number 3, the word yay here, is just a little bit, 10 pixels from the top and right corner. We have all 4 options. You can even specify all 4, top, bottom, left, and right. You might get unexpected results. It's typically recommended to just pick 2, a top or bottom, and a left or right. Shape 4 doesn't appear to have any CSS yet, so we'll make that. Shape 4. With an ID selector here. And let's put that one in the bottom right. These are buttons, and that's a very typical position for control buttons. For example, on a form, the submission buttons for a form, these look like that, a clear button and an OK button. So putting them in the bottom right corner of, say, a form would be very typical. That would be a good use of the bottom and right instead of the top and left. So that's all of section 1, our introduction to absolute positioning. Let's move on to section 2 by starting with a look at the HTML. Back in the inspector, here's section 2, ID is S2. Got an H2 again with the title of this section. And then we've got 5 images of snowflakes. They all have an ID. They don't have a class name, so we might have to get creative with selectors. Then we have a little paragraph of attribution for where these snowflake images came from. What CSS do we already have? Section 2 styles, just the small text for that attribution. So, first off, the section itself was already position relative from when we did that in section 1. So that's our context for absolute positioning of these snowflake shapes. These snowflakes were done with image tags. So I'm going to write a selector that selects the image tags within section 2. There was an ID of S2, and inside of S2, section 2, we had several image tags. I want all of those to now be position absolute. Watch what happens when I save and refresh. Once again, all of these elements that were position absolute are now pulled out of their normal flow. They've been stacked. There was no space left for them. They're kind of here at the center. Their left edge is now at the center. That's because they were text aligned with centering. Images are in line, so they were text aligned to the center. Over here with the divs, they were on the left because divs are not text, so they were not centered. So that's why these images have suddenly been stacked here. We would like to put them all in specific places. So let's start with snowflake number 1. They all had IDs starting with snow and then a number. So snowflake number 1, let's put that near the top and left. And then we will go into the inspector and fine-tune the position. So if you've been following along, now might be a good time to pause and make sure you've got the CSS code. Now I'll inspect. Here's snowflake number 1. There it is, ID snow 1. Here's that top and left we just put in. I think I want it to be a little bit further down. And maybe a little bit closer in from the left, about all the way to 140. Yeah, that looks nice. Let's take that. So top 30, left 140. Refresh, good, that's saved. Now, I want to scatter 5 snowflakes around here, and just putting 1 in, I'm already using a nice arrangement of the space. I'm going to need a little more space. So, in order to create more space in this section, we have some options. I could write a selector for the section and give it a height. That's one option. I can say height, maybe 200 pixels. Let's see what that does. I made it a little bigger. However, I liked having this attribution pushed down to the bottom. So maybe instead what I want to do is create space below this section 2 heading. In fact, maybe I like having the section 2 heading kind of vertically centered. This is an opportunity to use margins to help you approximate a vertical center. So instead of this height, let's forget that height. I want to select the H2 that's inside of this section 2 element. I don't want to select all the H2s because section 1 is fine and section 3 will be okay. I just want the H2 that's inside of S2. And I'm going to give it a large margin at the top and bottom. I'm going to start with 75 pixels. Left and right doesn't need any. So that's top and bottom, left and right. I could specify all 4. And it would be top, right, bottom, left, clockwise, around, starting at the top. Let's save that and see. There. So now I have a nice big margin above the title of section 2 and below that section 2 heading. Because I used a margin around this heading, it pushed the attribution down to the bottom where I liked it. Now we have more space, lots of blank space to work. Remember, margins and paddings are a good way to provide extra blank space around elements. Okay, back to the snowflakes. I'm going to position snowflake 2 on the right using maybe a little farther down. How about top 50 pixels and then come in a little farther. Yeah, we'll just get that a little further down and further in. There's my snowflake number 2. I'm just trying to scatter these around a little bit. So let's go on to number 3. Snowflake number 3. We'll go top and left again, 35 pixels. So not as far down, but a lot further in. Let's go way in, 300 pixels. Yeah, that tucked it right above section 2. Maybe it's just even a teensy bit too close to the text. So I will inspect it and I will pull it back a bit. I don't want it pushed down so far from the top, so I'll reduce that top value. Yeah, let's go with 30. Save that. Save the change. Good. Now we'll do snowflake number 4. We'll go from the top and right again. Bring it in, but maybe not as far. Actually, we'll bring it way under. Yeah. Okay. And then snowflake number 5. I want to kind of position it over in this empty space on like the bottom left of the heading, and I'm not sure what that's going to be. It'll be some further down from the top, well, maybe not quite as far as number 4, and then from the left, maybe a little farther than number 1. Okay. I'll make a guess. Snow 5. Maybe not quite as far down as number 4, so let's go top 100. farther than the left than number 1. Number 1 was 140, so let's go 160. I think I want it closer. I'm going to inspect that in a bit. 175, yeah. Okay, now I have some scattered snowflakes all around section 2. As a matter of interest, I am going to do a little extra CSS on these snowflakes. I'll just pick one of them. Let's say this one here, the last one we did, snowflake number 5. I'm going to inspect it. And I'm not so fond of all of these snowflakes having their points at the top. So I'm going to rotate snowflake number 5 using a CSS transformation. This is a CSS3 technique. You'll want to check your browser compatibility if you have to support old browsers. But since it's a purely visual technique, it's kind of okay if the older browsers don't support it, in my opinion. Then I need to decide how much I want to rotate it. I'm going to use degree measures. There's 360 degrees around a circle, and this snowflake has 6 sides. So that means there's a 60-degree difference between the first point and the next point. If I want it to not have a point at the top, I want to go halfway in between. 30 degrees would be right in between those 60-degree separated points. So, in my CSS, that was snowflake number 5. I want to do a transformation of a rotation at 30 degrees. Let's save that and refresh. Now my point is no longer at the top. I have rotated it 30 degrees, so it will be directly in between the 2 points. That's all for section 2. And section 3, I'm actually going to leave to you. We've got all of these cards here, and I am going to transform them into a hand. The way you would hold a hand of cards, kind of spread out in a fan shape. I'm going to do that off screen to show you how it will look, but the challenge for you is to try it yourself. You might need a combination of this rotation transformation along with absolute positioning to move those cards and fan them out. Here is my solution for the section 3 positioning so that the cards are looking like you would hold them in your hand. The hand of cards kind of fanned out. I included a display of some of the CSS that's needed here. I added position absolute to the .card class, and I added a height to the section. You could have used a margin spacing like we did in section 2, whatever you want. And then here's a way to get started with the first card, the Ace of Spades. You might wind up adjusting that positioning a little bit depending on what you do with the other cards. And I even threw in one little extra feature that you can see when I hover over these. The card I'm hovering over comes to the front. I'll add a little callout tooltip to show you the code for that as well. That's all for the absolute positioning tutorial. This has been a joint production of Abby's Door and AAA WebDev. Thank you for participating.